Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, we're plunging into one of the most transformative and, well, challenging eras in American history, the Great Depression.
It really reshaped the nation.
Absolutely.
Right.
We're not just looking at dates and numbers here. We really want to understand the human experience, the forces at play, and, the lasting impact.
And for that, we're drawing on Marc Favreau's book, Crash, The Great Depression and the Fall and Rise of America. It's a really compelling guide.
It is. Favreau's work, it really gets beyond just the economic data, doesn't it? It shows you what it felt like.
Yes, exactly. It focuses on the people, their lives, not just abstract policies.
Right. So to really grasp the scale of the crash,
Mhm.
we first need to understand where America was coming from. Let's set the scene. The Roaring '20s.
The Roaring '20s.
You hear that phrase and you immediately think prosperity, jazz, flappers, real boom time.
And on the surface, it certainly looked that way. Incredible technological leaps, cars becoming common, radio everywhere, assembly lines churning out consumer goods.
There was this feeling almost of unstoppable progress.
But, as Favreau points out, beneath that shiny surface, the foundation was, well, pretty unstable.
How so?
Well, for one thing, there was this huge surge in financial speculation.
And this wasn't just like careful investing, right? People were pouring money into the stock market,
Yeah.
chasing quick profits.
Often buying shares not with their own cash, but on margin. That's key.
Explain that a bit. Buying on margin.
It meant borrowing money, sometimes a huge percentage, like 90% of the stock's price, just to buy the shares.
Wow.
So if the stock price went up, fantastic. Huge return on your small investment. But if it dropped even slightly,
You could be wiped out instantly.
and still owe the borrowed money, it inflated stock prices way beyond the actual value of the companies.
So you had this massive bubble inflating. And at the same time, Favreau highlights these deeper cracks, right? Overproduction.
Yeah, in factories and on farms, they were making more stuff than people could actually afford to buy.
And crucially, wages for ordinary people just weren't keeping pace.
Exactly. So this combination, an overheated speculative market, plus these fundamental economic imbalances, it created the perfect conditions for disaster.
Which brings us to Black Tuesday, October 29, 1929.
The day the bottom fell out. A catastrophic drop in the market.
And that triggered this terrifying domino effect Favreau described.
Precisely. When stock values plummeted, that whole pyramid built on margin just collapsed. People lost everything they'd put in, plus the money they'd borrowed.
And the banks.
Banks that had invested heavily or lent money for those margin calls, they started failing, one after another.
And when banks fail, people panic. You see those images, those lines Favreau talks about.
Yeah, stretching down city blocks, people desperate to get their savings out before the doors shut for good.
For millions, their life savings just vanished. Poof.
And the crisis spread like wildfire from there. Without capital, businesses couldn't operate, couldn't pay workers.
Leading to massive closures.
Unemployment just skyrocketed. And even people lucky enough to keep their jobs often faced drastic wage cuts.
The immediate human cost was just devastating. Millions suddenly without any income.
Families losing their homes, evicted. The sheer scale of destitution was unlike anything America had really seen before.
Favreau uses these powerful descriptions, doesn't he? The bread lines, the soup kitchens.
Yes, trying to feed the suddenly poor. And those makeshift shanty towns, clusters of cardboard and scrap metal shelters.
Grimly nicknamed Hoovervilles.
After President Hoover, yeah. Stark symbols of the misery and, for many, the perceived lack of effective government help at that stage.
So the crash wasn't just about erasing wealth on paper. As the book shows, it shattered that national belief in endless progress. It profoundly disrupted daily life for almost everyone.
And what's perhaps most impactful in Favreau's account is exploring what daily life was actually like, beyond the headlines.
You mean the grinding reality, the constant insecurity?
Yes. Pervasive unemployment. Poverty that wasn't just a statistic, but a daily struggle for basic survival. Imagine waking up knowing there's no job, maybe no food.
And the psychological toll, especially for men who were traditionally the breadwinners.
Immense. Feelings of shame, despair, being unable to provide. Favreau touches on that sensitivity.
The book really highlights the resourcefulness families had to develop, though.
Incredible ingenuity, yeah. Patching clothes until they were almost nothing but patches. Neighbors pooling food for communal cooking.
Rely on those soup kitchens, charities, whatever they could find.
And the desperation led to movement. The figure of the hobo, riding the rails, searching town after town for any kind of work.
Even temporary back-breaking labor. It speaks to that rootlessness, the collapse of local opportunity.
Yet amidst all that hardship, Favreau also shows this incredible resilience, community adaptation.
People couldn't rely on institutions, so they relied on each other.
Absolutely. Bartering became common again. A farmer trading vegetables for a mechanic's repair work.
People formed these informal networks, mutual assistance, sharing whatever little they had.
And the experience wasn't uniform, was it? Cities versus rural areas.
Right. Cities had the visible homelessness, the Hoovervilles. But rural areas, they got hit with a double whammy.
Plummeting farm prices, often couldn't even sell crops for what it cost to grow them, and environmental disaster.
The Dust Bowl.
Catastrophic. Years of, well, unsustainable farming practices meant severe drought, turned fertile land into dust.
Dust storms so huge they blacked out the sky.
Yeah.
Favreau describes them vividly.
Unlivable conditions. It forced hundreds of thousands of farm families to just abandon everything, migrate, often west to California, desperately looking for work.
But even with all that, in both cities and the countryside, communities found ways to sort of keep spirits up.
They did. The book mentions simple things, communal gatherings, church groups, social clubs, even just playing games or music, offered crucial emotional relief, a sense of connection.
It really showed the depth of human perseverance. Ingenuity born of necessity. Cooperation.
It's a powerful part of the story Favreau tells, absolutely.
So you have this country in crisis, people facing unprecedented hardship. How did the government respond? Initially, under President Hoover, the approach was very different from what came later.
Hoover was a very capable man in many ways, but his core belief was in limited government intervention.
He thought the market would correct itself.
Largely, yes. He focused on stabilizing things, restoring confidence, advocating for voluntary action, local relief effort.
But he did eventually take some federal action, didn't he? The Reconstruction Finance Corporation.
Yes, the RFC, established in 1932. That was his most significant federal move. It provided emergency loans, but mainly to banks, railroads, big institutions.
The idea being it would trickle down.
That was the theory. But as Favreau details, the criticism was fierce. Too little, too late, too focused on the top, not enough direct help for people suffering right then.
And the situation kept getting worse.
Which really paved the way for a monumental shift, the election of Franklin D. Roosevelt in 1932.
FDR, he came in with a totally different philosophy, his promise of a New Deal.
A new deal for the American people. And it wasn't just one plan, was it?
No, it was this vast, almost experimental series of policies and programs aimed at the 3 R's, as they became known.
Relief, recovery, and reform.
Relief for the unemployed, recovery for the economy, and reform to try and prevent another depression. It marked an unprecedented expansion of federal power.
Let's look at some key initiatives Favreau highlights. You had programs like the Civilian Conservation Corps, the CCC.
Right, putting young men to work on environmental projects, parks, forests. Good work needed doing.
And the Works Progress Administration, the WPA, that became one of the largest.
Employing millions on huge public projects, roads, bridges, schools.
Even funding artists, writers, musicians. It put paychecks directly into people's hands, provided income, sure, but also a sense of purpose, of contributing.
Then there was help for farmers, the Agricultural Adjustment Act, the AAA.
Right, trying to boost farm prices by reducing those crippling surpluses. Controversial, definitely, but a direct attempt to tackle the agricultural crisis.
And a cornerstone, still fundamental today, the Social Security Act of 1935.
Huge. Laid the foundation for modern social welfare in the U.S. Unemployment insurance, pensions for the elderly, a basic safety net.
And crucially, to address the roots of the crash itself.
The Securities and Exchange Commission, the SEC, created specifically to regulate the stock market, prevent fraud, curb that excessive speculation that fueled the 1929 collapse.
These programs, they weren't just about economics, were they? They were about restoring hope, faith that the government could actually do something.
Absolutely. The New Deal ushered in this era of significantly increased government intervention, touching almost everyone's lives.
Beyond the government's actions, media and culture played a really crucial role too, didn't they? Shaping how people understood things, offering some solace.
Definitely. Think about newspapers. Yes, they reported the grim realities, the bank failures, unemployment stats, hardship stories.
But Favreau notes, they also featured stories of resilience, didn't they? Local heroes, glimmers of hope.
They did. And radio became absolutely central to daily life. It wasn't just for news.
It was the main source of entertainment, of escapism.
Families gathered around the radio, listening to music, comedy shows, dramas, a much-needed distraction from the harsh realities outside their doors.
And of course, FDR's fireside chats.
Transformative use of the medium. His calm, reassuring voice broadcast directly into homes.
Explaining policies, acknowledging the difficulties, outlining his plans, and it built this incredible sense of connection, of national unity.
It really was communication tailored perfectly for that moment, for that medium.
Culture also grappled with the era's challenges. Literature, for instance.
You think of John Steinbeck's The Grapes of Wrath? Vivid, heartbreaking portrayals of the Dust Bowl migrants, themes of poverty, injustice.
Music, too, capturing the whole emotional landscape.
Yeah, you had the raw blues and folk songs, Woody Guthrie singing about the Dust Bowl and the working man's struggles.
But also the rise of swing and jazz. Music for dancing, for forgetting your troubles.
The sense of release, yeah. And movies offered a similar mix. Some films tackled social issues, but many provided pure escapism.
Lavish musicals, comedies, fantasies.
Yeah.
Letting people forget for a couple of hours in the dark.
What's interesting, and Favreau points this out, is how the era fostered a kind of cultural shift in narratives.
How so?
A growing emphasis on community, cooperation, collective action. A subtle move away from that really strong, rugged, individualist narrative that dominated before the crash.
So media and culture acted as both a mirror, reflecting the tough reality, and a window, offering hope and a sense of shared experience.
Well put. So, with the New Deal rolling out and this cultural backdrop, how did the U.S. actually start its long, slow climb out?
Well, it was gradual, definitely not overnight. And those New Deal programs we talked about played a continuous role providing relief, stimulating activity.
Absolutely. Things like Social Security provided that ongoing safety net. The WPA kept employing millions. But critically, significant financial reforms were cemented.
Like the FDIC, the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation.
Yeah.
That was fundamental, wasn't it?
Absolutely fundamental. It restored trust in banks by ensuring deposits up to a certain amount. People knew their money was safe, even if a bank failed.
So those panic-driven bank runs largely became a thing of the past.
And the SEC's regulation of the stock market was vital, putting rules in place to curb the kind of wild speculation and fraud that happened in the 20s.
Other reforms, too, like strengthening labor rights.
Yes, the National Labor Relations Act. That helped stabilize the workforce and, over time, contributed to more consumer spending power as wages became more secure for unionized workers.
If we step back, Favreau really shows that one of the most profound, lasting changes was this fundamental shift in how people viewed the role of government.
The sheer scale of the crisis proved, to many people anyway, that the government had to play a more active role, managing the economy, providing for citizens' welfare.
Now, these changes were fiercely debated at the time.
And remain controversial for some even today, but they are widely seen now as essential steps taken during the recovery and crucial for building a more resilient economic system going forward.
Now, we focused heavily on the U.S. experience, naturally. But the sources, Favreau's book included, make it crystal clear. The Great Depression wasn't just an American problem.
Oh, absolutely not. It had this huge global ripple effect, proved just how interconnected the world economy was even back then.
When the U.S. economy tanked.
It had profound consequences everywhere. Think about Europe. Many nations still fragile after World War I, heavily reliant on U.S. loans for reconstruction.
When that American capital suddenly dried up.
They faced cascading financial crises, bank failures, industry collapse.
Germany is a particularly tragic example, isn't it?
Yes. Already grappling with war reparations, hyperinflation earlier, economic instability. The Depression brought massive unemployment, social unrest.
And Favreau notes this turmoil tragically contributed to the political environment that allowed Hitler and the Nazis to rise, ultimately leading to World War II.
The British Empire also felt severe strain. Global trade plummeted, hitting them hard.
Britain eventually abandoned the gold standard, didn't they?
Yeah.
A drastic move.
Hoping to make their exports cheaper, boost the economy. And the economic hardship also fueled nationalist movements in the colonies, adding pressure that led towards the end of the empire later on.
And across Asia.
Japan's economy, heavily reliant on exports, suffered badly from the drop in global demand. Many historians, and Favreau provides this context, see this economic pressure as a factor pushing Japan towards more militaristic expansion, searching for resources and markets.
China, too, already facing internal instability, saw its problems compounded.
So it truly was a worldwide catastrophe, showing how a crisis in one major economy like the U.S. could have devastating international consequences.
So after walking through all this history, drawing on Favreau's work, what's the enduring legacy? What lessons do we still carry today from the Great Depression?
Well, perhaps the single most impactful legacy is this deep collective awareness, maybe sometimes forgotten and rediscovered, of the importance of economic oversight and regulation.
That catastrophic collapse really hammered home the need for robust financial safeguards.
And you see that directly in the foundations of modern financial regulation. Laws like the Securities Act of 1933, the Securities Exchange Act of 1934 that created the SEC.
They established principles of transparency, fairness, investor protection that, well, are supposed to govern our markets today.
Exactly. And the implementation of social safety nets. Social Security is the prime example.
Revolutionary at the time.
Absolutely. But now seen as fundamental. Part of the government's role in providing a cushion against downturns, ensuring a basic level of well-being.
The Depression also ingrained this idea, maybe contested, but ingrained that government intervention is necessary, even crucial, during economic crises.
Right. Concepts like using government spending fiscal policy and controlling the money supply monetary policy to counteract downturns, what economists call counter-cyclical policies. Their roots are really in the New Deal response.
And we've seen these lessons applied or debated in our own times, haven't we?
Definitely. Think about the responses to the 2008 financial crisis or the economic shocks from the COVID-19 pandemic. Policymakers explicitly drew on the experiences, both successes and failures, of the 1930s.
Designing bailouts, stimulus measures, tightening regulations.
Economists and policymakers are constantly studying this era, trying to refine that balance between fostering growth and innovation and preventing that excessive speculation, that unchecked risk-taking that led to the crash.
In many ways, the difficult lessons learned then provide a kind of blueprint, or at least a crucial case study, for navigating modern economic challenges.
All with the goal of building a more stable, more secure economic future. Hopefully.
This has been quite a journey, a deep dive drawing on Marc Favreau's crash. We've gone from the shaky prosperity of the 20s through the devastating crash itself, the immense struggles, but also the incredible resilience of daily life.
The transformative government responses, the cultural shifts, the global impact.
And the long shadow this period still casts over our world today.
Understanding this time isn't just about history lessons, is it? As the book really shows, it illuminates the foundations of so many of our modern economic and social systems, and the ongoing debates about the role of government.
It really encourages reflection, I think, on that vital, sometimes tense balance between individual initiative and collective security, especially when the economic ground feels shaky.
Absolutely.
So, as you think about the story of the Great Depression and its aftermath, here's a final thought for you to consider, drawing from our discussion today. In our incredibly interconnected, fast-moving global economy, how do we effectively identify the subtle warning signs of an economic bubble before it bursts? And what are the inherent trade-offs, both in terms of economic freedom and just practical implementation, when we try to put safeguards in place to prevent future crashes?